Tensions are rising ahead of critical talks over the future of the international rugby calendar, with New Zealand Rugby's players' body firing a clear warning shot at Rugby Australia as discussions intensify around shifting the Rugby Championship to align with the Six Nations. At the center of the debate is Rob Nichol, Chief Executive of the New Zealand Rugby Players Association, NZRPA, who has cautioned that any move to reschedule the Rugby Championship could have significant and potentially damaging consequences for the Southern Hemisphere game, particularly in New Zealand. While South Africa and Argentina appear strongly in favor of change, and Australia has reportedly softened its stance, New Zealand remains unconvinced that a push for a global calendar, the proposal to realign the Rugby Championship with the Northern Hemisphere season, has gathered momentum in recent months. The concept has been described by some administrators as the first credible attempt to create a truly global rugby calendar, one that synchronizes international windows, player welfare regulations, and domestic competitions across both hemispheres. Driving much of the enthusiasm from the South is South Africa. Springboks head coach Rassie Erasmus has publicly backed the idea of moving the Rugby Championship to earlier in the year, arguing that a more harmonized structure would ease player workload pressures and streamline competition management. "I think it will sort out a lot of problems for us," Erasmus said recently, highlighting issues around player rest protocols and squad management. According to him, aligning competitions globally would make it easier to implement consistent welfare standards and scheduling frameworks. Former Argentina captain Agustin Pichot is set to play a prominent role in the discussions, lending further weight to the proposal. The involvement of such a respected figure underscores how seriously the idea is being treated at governance level. For South Africa and Argentina, the advantages are obvious. Many of their leading players are based in Europe and Japan, meaning they already operate largely within the Northern Hemisphere season. A calendar shift would reduce the strain on those players, who currently transition almost seamlessly from club rugby into international duty and back again, often with little meaningful off-season. Australia warming to the idea historically, New Zealand has been seen as the most resistant of the Rugby Championship nations when it comes to altering the season. But recently, according to SA Rugby CEO Rian Oberholzer, the balance of opinion may have shifted. Speaking publicly, Oberholzer suggested that Australia is now more open to the change, leaving New Zealand as the primary obstacle. In the past, when we last talked about it seriously, New Zealand was the biggest challenge. Australia is now on board, he said, expressing optimism that progress could be made this time around. From an Australian perspective, the potential commercial upside is clear. A rescheduled Rugby Championship could create a prime domestic window between April and September, a period during which Super Rugby Pacific could go head-to-head with the NRL and AFL in Australia's crowded sporting marketplace without overlapping with international fixtures. For Rugby Australia, that uninterrupted block of domestic rugby presents an enticing opportunity. It would allow them to promote Super Rugby Pacific more aggressively within their own market, without losing players to mid-season international commitments. Nichol's warning. Be careful what you wish for, however. Nichol has warned that what may seem attractive in theory could carry unintended consequences, particularly for the trans-Tasman relationship. "I can see what they're thinking," Nichol said, acknowledging Australia's commercial motivations. "They're thinking, okay, it creates a big window, April, September, for us to put Super Rugby up against the NRL and AFL in the domestic market." From Australia's standpoint, eliminating Rugby Championship clashes after July would create a clean runway for domestic competition. But Nichol argues that such logic fails to account for the realities of the New Zealand rugby ecosystem. New Zealand operates within a delicate and deeply embedded structure that includes Super Rugby Pacific and the NPC, National Provincial Championship. The NPC, in particular, remains a cornerstone of the country's rugby identity, serving as both a developmental pathway and a community-focused competition with historic significance. "For us, we got this incredible competition called the NPC, so that doesn't work for us." Nichol explained that he went further, questioning whether Super Rugby Pacific would even retain its current prominence under a new calendar. "If we're going to move away from that, Will we actually go for a Super Rugby comp, or will we actually go the other way around and just make a longer NPC? That statement underscores the seriousness of New Zealand's position. Rather than simply slotting Super Rugby into a new international window, New Zealand could reconsider the balance between provincial and franchise rugby altogether. A fundamental ecosystem shift. Nichol insists that this is not a minor scheduling tweak. For New Zealand, it would represent a structural overhaul of an entire rugby ecosystem that has evolved over decades. What we have works for us, he said plainly. The warning to Australia is subtle but unmistakable. If Rugby Australia backs South Africa's proposal without fully considering New Zealand's priorities, it could destabilize the current Super Rugby Pacific model. Super Rugby Pacific relies on cooperation between New Zealand and Australian franchises. If New Zealand were to reassess its commitment to that structure, perhaps prioritizing a longer NPC season instead, the competition's current format could be fundamentally altered. Nichol stressed that no change should be considered inevitable. It's not just a fait accompli. You put Super Rugby into it and bypass NPC, he said. In other words, a clear domestic window does not automatically guarantee that Super Rugby Pacific will fill it. South Africa's gains, New Zealand's risks. Nichol has also questioned whether the proposed calendar shift genuinely benefits all stakeholders or primarily serves South Africa's interests. There's little doubt that moving the Rugby Championship would significantly ease South Africa's scheduling challenges. Since joining the Northern Hemisphere club competitions and aligning more closely with European rugby structures, the Springboks have been navigating an increasingly complex player availability landscape. A synchronized calendar would align international and club seasons, offering South African players clearer rest periods and reducing year-round rugby exposure. But for New Zealand, the equation is very different. The All Blacks operate within a domestic system that remains largely self-contained. The current sequencing of Super Rugby Pacific, NPC, and international rugby fits into a rhythm that players, coaches, broadcasters, and fans understand. For us to seriously contemplate something like this, it's really got to be a very compelling case as to why we would do that, Nichol said. That compelling case, he suggests, has yet to be made. It's easy for a party to say, "Oh, we just really like to see a Rugby Championship at the start of the year," he continued. Well, that's nice that you'd like to see it there, but what does it actually mean for everyone? A massive conversation ahead. Nichol emphasized that even opening the debate in New Zealand would be significant. If you want us in our country to have that debate, it's a really, really big conversation, and one that we're not really wanting to have unless there's a really good reason for having it. This stance reflects a broader sentiment within New Zealand rugby circles, that stability and continuity remain valuable commodities. The All Blacks have historically been the Rugby Championship's most successful team, and their domestic structure has long been seen as a model of efficiency and talent production. Disrupting that model without clear, measurable benefits would be seen as an unnecessary gamble. Key figures heading to the talks. The issue is set to dominate discussions at World Rugby's upcoming Shape of the Game conference. New Zealand Rugby will be represented by director Greg Barkley and All Blacks assistant coach Jason Rian. South Africa's delegation is expected to include Oberholzer and Springboks assistant coach Felix Jones. The presence of such senior figures highlights how pivotal these talks are. The decisions made or postponed could shape the global rugby calendar for decades. For South Africa and Argentina, alignment appears to be a logical evolution. For Australia, it may represent a commercial lifeline in a competitive sporting environment. But for New Zealand, the risks may outweigh the rewards, at least for now.